This is the story of a woman with a secret. Today's story is called To Change the Future, Start Living in It.
Season 3 of the story features 12 trailblazers who created technologies that changed the world. The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. And now, on to the story.
She ran through her design for the third time that morning. Scratching notes on a blank pad, she ran calculations on the slide rule again and again and again. Each time she was checking her math. I've got to be missing something, she thought. But no, she couldn't believe it. Her solution was right, and it was going to work. The discovery would make all the difference on the top secret Project Y. Why hasn't someone already thought of this, she thought? Besides, her team had a pretty rigid way of doing things. She had broken protocol and she had designed a new solution. It wasn't going to fly. With a shaky hand, she picked up a phone and dialed her boss's number. He picked up. She could barely get the words out. I'd like to call a special team meeting so I can present something new I've discovered. 2 days later, she was presenting in front of the entire Project Y team. She slowed her speech so they wouldn't hear her voice shaking. At the end of her presentation, she held her breath. Crickets. Her heart sank. The men leafed through the drawings. Everyone was silent and waiting for the 4 leaders in the room to speak first. Finally, her boss started nodding. Yep. Yeah, this'll work. In an instant, the energy in the room changed. Let's build a prototype and test it, another leader shouted. ASAP, said another. It'll require a lot of transistors, and they're pretty expensive, another voice said. No worries there, said her boss. The CEO gave us a blank check to build the fastest supercomputer in the world. This is going to help us get there. He turned and looked at the young woman who had presented the solution. Congrats, Lynn. This is genius. I'm going to call our CEO and tell him what you created. In that moment, she felt on top of the world. And yet, at the same time, she felt miserable. She still had her secret that she dared not voice to any living soul, not even her spouse. The next 2 years proved to be an emotional roller coaster for the woman. At work, she basked in the glory that came from her groundbreaking invention. But at home, she wallowed in the mire of her secret. She sought solace in spending time with her 2 tiny daughters, but with the secret weighing constantly on her mind, she felt like she was drowning. Reluctantly, she tried to confide in her spouse. The conversation did not go well. It only led her further into depression. She felt like life was passing her by. Utter hopelessness consumed her. One night, when she was alone, she pulled the shoebox from the top shelf of the bookshelf down. She set it on the floor in front of her. She slumped into a heap, afraid to open it. In her state of mind, she saw only one viable option, and she loathed the idea of it. But the alternative was to do nothing, and the pain of her secret, and carrying it all alone, and knowing that the only person in her life that she trusted, her spouse, didn't want to hear it, was crushing her. She opened the shoebox and pulled out the handgun. She loaded it and spent a long moment staring at it. She was in unbelievable pain. She just wanted it to end. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Suddenly, her spouse burst into the room. Stop. We can work through this, together. She put the gun down, and they held each other sobbing on the floor. The next few weeks of working with counselors and therapists was draining, but she felt like she was on the right path. For the first time in years, she saw a tiny ray of light in the dark. She went to the personnel department at work and thought that she might share her secret with them. At first, it sounded like a great idea, and when she started talking, it felt like a relief. But soon she grew worried. The personnel department told her that she needed to run everything by corporate management, just to make sure everything was okay. The next day, an HR exec summoned her into his office. He spoke first. Lynn, we're sorry, but what you have isn't going to, it's not going to be a good fit for us. What's that mean? Asked Lynn. It means that you've been terminated. She was devastated. And soon after, word of her secret got out. It spread. Her world collapsed. Extended family members cut ties with her. Former friends and colleagues would no longer say hello when they saw her. Since her employer was so powerful in the industry, partly due to her invention, being fired meant being ostracized in the entire industry. Shortly after that, her marriage ended. Soon after that, the courts cut off her completely from her daughters. She had nothing left. Lao Tzu said, "If you do not change the direction, you may end up where you are heading." The woman could see where things were headed, so she went into stealth mode. She changed direction and rebuilt every aspect of her life. She moved, changed her name, found new friends, and built up a new support system. She left her past behind her. She left her secret and took on work as a contract programmer. She told new employers that she had no previous work experience. No one would ever know of her former employer or her success, not even about Project Y. Despite the drastic changes in her life, she was starting to feel better. A few years later, a headhunter called with an opportunity at Park, Xerox's new Palo Alto research center. Park's mission, its people, and the computing environment felt just right. The offer was generous, and she wanted to accept. She was terrified. What if her past caught up with her? Would it ruin everything? In a leap of faith, she decided to share her secret and the entire story. It was a huge risk. Like that first discovery and that first presentation that she made for Project Y, it was one of the scariest moments in her life. She laid it all out on the table to Xerox's HR department and waited. And then, they thanked her for the extra information. The HR exec smiled and said, "Our offer's still on the table. We'd love to have you join the team." Lynn was thrilled. In her new role, she developed more advanced silicon chips, the same technology which later gave Silicon Valley its name. She then wrote the Introduction to VLSI Systems, which became the Bible of computer chip design. So to put this in proper perspective, nearly every single piece of technology that we use today is possible because of Lynn's contributions. She later worked at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, where she worked in high-end performance computing, machine intelligence, autonomous systems, and intelligent weapon technologies, all during the height of the Cold War. Eventually, she took a job teaching at the University of Michigan. She was at the top of her game, and her secret was still safe. Then she received a phone call. It was a historian. He was asking questions about the origins of DIS, or dynamic instruction scheduling, an invention that made Project Y a success and gave her previous employer the fastest supercomputer in the world. Lynn was happy to answer his questions, until they started to get very specific. But who invented DIS, he asked. Was it the whole group of engineers or just one person? She clarified that a single engineer, yes, had been the only one, to discover and develop the concept. She confided that she was that engineer. "Oh, come on," scoffed the historian. "Your name doesn't appear in any of the records." She hesitated. There was no way to answer the question without revealing her secret. But there was also no other way to claim her rightful place in the history of computing. She had to share her whole story. Lynn knew that her invention was widely used and referenced in all the computer architecture textbooks, without her name mentioned even once. She sighed. It was time to share, and that meant telling her secret. "Well, the reason why my name isn't listed is because when I began at my old company, I was a man." The historian listened politely, and to her amazement, kept asking great questions. He didn't seem to care, and she shared her full story. She, in this story, was Lynn Conaway, a technology pioneer, trailblazer, and inventor. Lynn was born a man, but had a lifelong feeling that she was a woman. In 1968, she transitioned and became a woman. In those days, this terrified her old employer and many of those around her. The courts, her wife, her ex-coworkers, and she had to rebuild her life from scratch, all alone, without any support. She didn't share her whole story or secret with the public until she talked with that historian in 1999. Lynn Conaway is a patriot and pioneer who changed our future for the better. Her trailblazing efforts created many of the technological marvels and tools that we enjoy and use every day. Her work helped DARPA and the United States win the Cold War and opened up the frontier for the internet boom in the late 1990s. One of Lynn's favorite mantras is that if you want to change the future, start living as if you're already there. That's her story. What's yours going to be?
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Story. We have an exclusive giveaway for listeners of The Story, 2 free tickets to Dreamforce. Dreamforce brings together thought leaders, industry pioneers, and customers for 4 high-energy days of learning, inspiration, equality, fun, and incredible concerts. Head to thestorypodcast.com and enter to win today. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor Salesforce for sharing these stories of technology trailblazers who changed the world.
If you like this episode of The Story, please help spread these stories by telling one friend. Also, you can hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Story is created by our team here at The Mission. The Mission is your #1 source for accelerated learning. To get more stories and podcasts like this and our world-class newsletter, subscribe at themission.co.
That's themission.co. See you next time.